You reach for your coffee mug and someone else's hand is already on it. For half a second, before any words form, something in your chest tightens. That flash of possessiveness happens faster than conscious thought. Psychologist Ori Friedman at the University of Waterloo has spent over a decade studying when this feeling first appears in humans. In his 2013 research, children as young as 2 years old, before most of them could speak in full sentences, already understood ownership. Show a toddler a stranger holding a toy, then show the same toddler a different person who had simply touched that toy first, and the child will point to the second person as the rightful owner, not the one holding it, the one who had it first. That instinct shows up even earlier in other primates. At Emory University, primatologist Franz de Waal and researcher Sarah Brosnan ran an experiment with capuchin monkeys starting in 2003. 2 monkeys, side by side, were each trained to trade a small rock for a food reward. When one monkey received a cucumber slice and the other received a grape, a far more desirable reward for the same task. The cucumber-receiving monkey didn't just refuse to eat. In video recordings that have since been viewed millions of times, the monkey hurled the cucumber back at the researcher. Unequal outcomes triggered visible outrage, even in a species that split from the human line roughly 35 million years ago. So, the pattern seems clear. Possession, fairness, the sting of losing something you had. These look hardwired, deep, older than language itself. But if ownership were purely biological, something fixed in every human brain the same way, every human culture would treat property identically. They don't, not even close. For most of the roughly 300,000 years Homo sapiens has existed, huge numbers of human societies operated with something closer to the opposite of what you feel when your coffee mug gets touched. Anthropologist Richard Borshay Lee spent from 1963 to 1969 living among the Jew/Hwanzi San people in the Kalahari Desert of Botswana, documenting one of the most detailed records ever made of a foraging society. What he found upended assumptions anthropologists had carried for decades. The Jew-Hwanzi practiced something researchers call demand sharing. If a hunter returned with meat, he did not get to decide who ate it or how much. Custom dictated the distribution, down to which cuts went to which relatives, in-laws, and neighbors. A successful hunter, who tried to boast about his kill, or acted as if the meat belonged to him personally, was mocked, deliberately. San elders told Lee they insulted a hunter's catch on purpose, calling a fat eland just bones, specifically to stop pride from turning into ownership, and ownership from turning into hierarchy. Decades later, anthropologist Frank Marlowe documented nearly identical patterns studying the Hadza people of Tanzania between 1995 and 2010. One of the last populations on Earth still living primarily by hunting and gathering. Among the Hadza, accumulating surplus food was not just unusual, it was actively discouraged. Anyone who tried to stockpile resources faced social pressure that ranged from ridicule to the group simply leaving camp without them. These weren't isolated case studies. Anthropologists have identified similar leveling mechanisms, custom specifically designed to prevent one person from accumulating more than others. In foraging societies on nearly every continent, from the Aka people of Central Africa to indigenous groups across Australia, for the vast majority of human history, before agriculture, before cities, before the concept of land as something a person could hold, this was closer to the norm. Not communism in the modern political sense, something older and stranger, a world where mine barely existed as a category because almost nothing could be stored, hidden, or defended long enough to be worth owning, which means the tightness in your chest when someone touches your coffee mug isn't some ancient survival instinct passed down unbroken from the earliest humans. It's something else, something that had to be built, and the moment it started being built has a location, and it has a date. Around 11,600 years ago, in a region archaeologists now call the Fertile Crescent, something happened that had never happened before in the history of the species. People stopped moving. The Natufian culture, based in what is now Israel, Jordan, and Lebanon, left behind the earliest known permanent human settlements, dense clusters of stone-walled houses at sites like Ain Malaha. occupied continuously starting around 12,000 BCE. For nearly the entire prior existence of Homo sapiens, staying in one place for more than a few weeks made little sense. Food ran out. Groups followed herds, followed seasons, followed rain. Ownership was almost impossible to enforce when you had to carry everything on your back. Settlement changed the math entirely. Archaeologist Ian Cuit, who has excavated Natufian sites since the 1990s, found something telling in the ground itself: storage pits. Stone-lined containers, sometimes over a meter deep, built specifically to hold surplus wild grain through the lean months. For the first time, a family could sit on top of more food than they needed today. And once something sits still long enough for one person to guard it, an entirely new question enters human life. Whose is this? Then came the wheat itself. At Tel Abu Huraira, a site in modern Syria excavated by archaeologist Gordon Hillman, starting in 1972, researchers found direct evidence of the shift from gathering wild grain to deliberately planting it, dated to roughly 9,500 BCE. Cultivating wheat wasn't a single moment of discovery. It was a slow generational process of clearing land, saving seed, returning to the same plot year after year. And clearing land creates something wild grain never could: a boundary. A plot someone worked becomes, in a way it never was before, a plot someone owns. Here's where it gets stranger. Farming didn't just create the concept of owning land, it appears to have rewired how humans measured their own worth. Archaeologist Ian Hodder has spent decades excavating Çatalhöyük, a settlement in central Turkey inhabited from roughly 7,500 to 6,400 BCE, at its peak home to as many as 8,000 people. Hodder's team found something striking as they dug through the site's layered houses, built directly on top of one another over centuries. The size and contents of homes started gradually to diverge. Earlier layers show relatively uniform houses. Later layers show some homes packed with more goods, more grain storage, more valuable items than others. That divergence is the earliest physical fingerprint of inequality archaeologists can point to, not carved into any law, but pressed into the dirt floors of ordinary houses, thousands of years before anyone wrote the word property in any language. But there's a problem with pinning it all on farming, a problem that shows up almost 2,000 years before Çatalhöyük's grain-storing farmers ever existed, at a site that, by every rule archaeologists thought they understood, should not have been built at all. At Göbekli Tepe, in what is now southeastern Turkey, archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began excavating in 1995 and found something that shouldn't have existed according to nearly every model archaeologists had built about human development. Massive carved limestone pillars, some standing over 5 meters tall and weighing up to 10 tons, arranged in circular enclosures and decorated with animals. The site dates to roughly 9,600 BCE. That's before pottery, before the wheel, before, as far as anyone can tell, permanent agriculture in the region. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were still hunter-gatherers. That single fact broke the tidy version of the story. The one where farming comes first, surplus comes second, and ownership follows as the natural third step. Raising and moving 10-ton pillars requires organizing dozens, maybe hundreds of people over extended periods. It requires someone deciding who works, who eats, who's in charge of the project. Schmidt's excavation suggested that large-scale cooperation, and the hierarchies that come with it, might have started before farming, and that farming may have followed as a way to feed workers who were already gathering for other reasons, not the other way around. Either way the sequence ran, the destination was the same: humans organizing themselves around resources that had to be claimed, defended, and assigned. And once that happens at the scale of a project like Göbekli Tepe, ownership stops being a private feeling in someone's chest. It starts needing rules other people agree to follow. Those rules eventually got written down. In 1901, French archaeologists excavating in Susa, in modern-day Iran, uncovered a black stone stele over 2 meters tall, covered in cuneiform script. The Code of Hammurabi, created around 1754 BCE under the Babylonian king Hammurabi, contains 282 laws, and a striking number of them concern property directly. Law 21 specifies the punishment for breaking into a house. Law 8 sets exact penalties, in multiples of the stolen item's value, for theft of livestock. For the first time in the archaeological record, ownership wasn't just a social custom enforced by gossip and shame, the way it had been among the Zhou/Huanzi. It was law backed by the authority of a state, carved in stone so it could outlast the people who wrote it. Rome pushed the idea further. Roman law, formalized over centuries and eventually compiled under Emperor Justinian around 529 CE, introduced a concept called dominium, near absolute ownership, giving a person the legal right to use, sell, or even destroy something simply because it was theirs. That idea, radical at the time, became the root of property law across most of Europe. Centuries later, it crossed the Atlantic embedded in colonial legal systems and became a foundational assumption in the property laws of the modern United States. By this point, ownership had traveled an extraordinary distance. It started as a feeling a 2-year-old shows before she can speak, a flash of mine faster than conscious thought. It became a custom that Zhou Huanzi actively worked to suppress, mocking successful hunters to keep pride from calcifying into hierarchy. It hardened into storage pits at Ain Malaha, into divided houses at Çatalhöyük, into carved law at Susa, into abstract legal doctrine under Justinian. But there's still one piece missing. The feeling itself, that hot, immediate tightening when someone touches your coffee mug, that's not something Hammurabi's laws installed in you. Laws don't rewire instinct that fast, and that specific sensation shows up in toddlers too young to have absorbed any legal system at all. So, the question isn't just how ownership got written into law, it's how an idea that varied so wildly across 300,000 years of human cultures, present in some societies, actively suppressed in others, ended up feeling, to you personally, like something as fixed and automatic as flinching from heat. That answer isn't in the law, it's in your brain. And in the 1970s, an economist found a way to prove it. In 1990, 3 economists, Daniel Kahneman, Jack Netsch, and Richard Thaler, ran an experiment that would end up cited in thousands of later studies. At Cornell University, they handed half a room of students an ordinary coffee mug, just handed it to them. Then they asked, how much would you sell it for? The mug owners on average wanted around $5.25. Then they asked the other half of the room, students who'd never held the mug at all, how much they'd pay to get one. The buyers offered about half that, $2.25 to $2.75. Same mug, same room, same students, drawn from the same population. The only difference was which side of mine a person happened to land on. Ownership, Kahneman and Thaler found, doesn't just change what you'll pay. It changes what you believe something is worth, the instant it becomes yours. They called it the endowment effect, and it has since been replicated with pens, chocolate bars, lottery tickets, concert seats, objects with no sentimental history at all, freshly assigned in a lab, 5 minutes old. That's the mechanism behind the flash in your chest. It isn't cultural conditioning alone, and it isn't pure ancient instinct either. It's a switch in the brain that flips the moment possession registers. And neuroscientists have since traced it to specific activity in the medial prefrontal cortex, the same region involved in how you process your own identity. Owning something, even briefly, appears to fold it into your sense of self, which means when someone reaches for your coffee mug, some part of your brain isn't just defending an object, it's defending you. Here's what makes this stranger than it first sounds. That switch is universal, wired into a 2-year-old before she has language for it, present in capuchin monkeys who split from the human line 35 million years ago. But what the switch is aimed at, and how far a person or a society lets it run, has been rewritten again and again across 300,000 years. The Zhuangzi didn't lack the endowment effect. They built an entire culture of mockery and ritual insult, specifically to override it, generation after generation, because they understood how easily mine curdles into hierarchy if nothing holds it back. Çatalhöyük's residents didn't invent inequality from nothing. They simply stopped resisting a pull that had been sitting in the human brain the entire time, waiting for permanent walls and full grain stores to give it room to grow. So, the feeling in your chest when someone touches your mug isn't really about the mug. It's a 35-million-year-old reflex, caught in a legal and cultural architecture that's less than 4,000 years old, running inside a brain that can't tell the difference between defending your property and defending yourself. Every time you say mine, you're not just naming who gets to keep something. You're using the oldest trick your brain has for deciding where you end and the world begins.